if those dreams were nightmares, you were thinking about the stanzas of Zion.
All right, welcome everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start with the first.
Foundations. Whatever differences are to be found in the various presentations of the esoteric doctrine, yet in every one of them we find the fullest agreement upon one point, the road to spiritual development. Only inflexible rule has been ever binding upon the neophyte, as it is binding now, the complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher.
So as we discussed in the previous session, today this idea of the subjugation of the lower nature may seem not very pleasant for people. I think that is partly a cultural problem where we are raised to pamper the lower nature and to protect it and to please it and to stimulate it. I think in humanity we tend to go from one extreme to the other. We come from a culture that was repressive, that was the idea we are sinners, we cannot do anything by ourselves, and then we go to the other extreme as a reaction, and now we worship the lower nature. The problem with reactions is that they are never intelligent, they are just reactions, and they take us to an equally wrong position. So we have to find the balance between being too severe and being too lax with our lower nature. It happens also with raising the kids. One generation of parents were very harsh, and then the next generation are friends of their children instead of being parents, and that brings their own, its own problems. So we tend to do this in humanity. Now, according to Blavatsky, all serious spiritual traditions agree on the need for the higher nature to be in charge of the lower nature. And in my view also, I fully agree with this, and that's how I judge whether a tradition is spiritual or not. Regardless of the beliefs of the tradition, whether they believe in reincarnation or only one life, whether they believe in a God or an impersonal principle. To me, those are all details. What is more important is whether that tradition is feeding the lower nature or feeding the higher nature. And that is personally my problem in general with the New Age, because for the most part the New Age seems to be constantly feeding the lower nature. And the problem is that the lower nature is the source of suffering. The lower nature, when we say the lower nature, there is nothing wrong with the body, there is nothing wrong with the emotions, there is nothing wrong with the mind. The problem is to believe that this is all we are, and therefore we identify with this aspect of our nature, and we become slaves of this. In the Theosophical view, the personality is always seen as a vehicle of consciousness. You have at the feet of the master, for example, this little book, the idea that the body is like a horse. So how should we deal with the body, and not only the body, also the emotions and mind? How should we deal with them? The book says we should train it with love. We should take care of it, but we should train it. I remember I was went to learn to ride a horse. There was a native person that was teaching. He loved, of course, nature and horses. And then I was riding it, and then we were walking on a road of pavement, and the horse went to the side where there was grass. And I let him go there, and so he said, no, bring it to the road. And I said, well, maybe his feet hurts or something like that. And he said that is the totally wrong attitude to have. If you let the horse do whatever he wants, you will become a prisoner of the horse. They are very intelligent, and he will start doing whatever he wants. And what you have to do, you are the master here, and you are the one that has to tell the horse where it has to go. And he said all that very lovingly. So there is no contradiction between having love and yet disciplining. Same with pets. You know, we can train a pet with love and yet be, you know, really train the pet, or we can let the pet do whatever he wants, which is a different style, is fine at the level of the pets, but with us, when we let our body, our emotions, our mind do whatever they want, then we become slaves, and that is the problem. So what HPB is talking about here is the need for the higher consciousness to be the master of the lower consciousness. Not with aggression, not with harshness, with love, but also in a firm way.
I wonder if there's any consistency or correlation in how we do deal with our pets and how we do deal with our children or things of that nature.
How we deal with us.
And then how we deal with ourselves. That's a question to come. The man must have control of his physical, astral, and mental bodies. All these must be servants of the higher ego. To gain that mastery would mean a very great deal of work for the ordinary person, and many people would say, I cannot do that. It is no use talking about it. It is altogether too high an ideal to set before them all at once. But it ought not to be serious to demand to make upon those who have been meditating and thinking on these matters for many years. Truly, it is not easy to tread down one by one all sort of passions and desires, to curb the astral and mental bodies. These things are hard, but they are splendidly well worth doing, and the result attained thereby is quite out of all proportion to even the great efforts required. Lebir.
It is said that the Buddha said that conquering the self is harder than conquering 1,000 men in 1,000 battles. And if you take that literally, you know how hard it is, well, probably you don't know, but we imagine how hard it is to be in a battle, and yet to conquer ourselves is far harder. And you have that. There are great people who went to the wars, they are great war heroes, they have a lot of courage, and then they don't have enough courage to deal with their problems at home or with themselves, or to deal with life. Dealing with oneself is the hardest possible task. And this is why in humanity we are still not too different from what we were thousands of years ago. You know, yes, the rules of society restrain us from doing certain things, but I don't know that we are less selfish or less violent or less anything. Because it is a hard task, there is no doubt about it. And when we come in touch with the theosophical teachings, it is natural that for some time, we work at the level of getting acquainted with the teachings, with the ideals, with the methods, and we don't need to expect us to be working actively on a self-transformation right away. But in time, that should be the direction in which we want to move. So that little by little we can start applying some of these teachings. And the more we apply them, after the lag time where we can start seeing results, the more strength we will get, because what Lebir says there at the end is perfectly true. It may be hard to fight some tendency in ourselves, but when you transcend that tendency, the freedom that comes after transcending the tendency is well worth all the effort. We don't realize sometimes that when we are a slave of a particular tendency, how much suffering that brings us. And of course, trying to work with that tendency may be hard and frustrating and difficult. But once we transcend that tendency, the result is, just as he says, is quite out of proportion with the efforts that we had to make. Now you can see that only after you finish the process. When you are in the middle of the process, it is really hard, and it's natural. We don't need to lie to ourselves about it. And some tendencies may have been developed for many lifetimes, so it may take, a good amount of effort to deal with them. Some others may be easier, but it is always worth doing and worth trying. And as we said, even if we don't succeed at the moment, we are succeeding from a deeper level. This is like physics. There is no way in the world of physics that you will apply a force and that force is not going to have a result. In spirituality, it's exactly the same. There is no way that the slightest of efforts in fighting something, and I say fighting in quotation marks, is not going to produce a result. Now, the results, as we said, they begin on the inner planes, and until they manifest on the physical plane, it takes some time, because they begin to reorganize our mental and emotional bodies. So we need many times the faith, the confidence to go through this. It comes by studying all these things and seeing that they seem rational and that it makes sense, and that intellectual certainty may hold us until we start seeing the results.
And one of the things we have to remember, going back to the horse analogy, is we don't get to choose what kind of horse we get to ride. So we may have a nice docile, nice calm horse that we just give a little tug of the reins and it goes where we want it to. Or we may be given, this bucking bronco that's going to take some time to get going. And then I always say sometimes we're given three-legged horses and we're really limited in what we can do in for that particular ride or that particular lifetime.
Yes, that's important. We need to realize that when a person gets to a certain degree of maturity, where that soul is not just living, but is in the process of beginning to take life as a training ground, then the rules change. Then that soul takes on challenges that may be harder than many other people around, that our souls are still you don't give certain responsibilities to a child, not because the child is not worth it, not because the child is less important as a human being, just because out of wisdom you recognize the child has to go through certain experiences before it can handle certain things. To a teenager you give a little more responsibilities, to an adult you give more, and it's something natural. Life does the same with the souls. We are souls at different ages. This doesn't imply any discrimination. So it is because we don't have kindness in our hearts that we are so sensitive to the idea of any difference. We use differences to control. We use difference to exclude. We use differences to ideas of differences to bully others. But the truth is that in the universe, there are differences all over the place. So if we can develop love in our heart, we learn how to deal with the differences without using those differences in a selfish way or in an aggressive way. So there are souls at different levels of growth because the evolution starts from different points. Those souls who are still not strong enough, they are normally not given too many difficulties simply because the soul cannot take it. But if the soul begins to be more mature and able to deal with more challenges, those will be given. So it is those souls that are mature that many times are given this difficult horse. If you judge yourself by how docile the horse is, then you are making a mistake. Docile horses are pleasant, but also they have very little potentiality. The hard horses are far, harder to train, but they have far more potentialities. So you were given a personality that, from a certain point of view, has nothing to do with you, in the sense that your value has nothing to do with how the personality is. The personality is in a particular way because you need to learn certain things through that personality. So whatever the personality is, your duty is to see how much you can improve it, how much you can train it. The personality is not you. So if we understand this deeply, then we can work with the personality with freedom. You can recognize, well, this personality tends to be lazy, angry, sad. That's the horse that you were given. What am I going to do with this? How can I work with this? No guilt, no sense of frustration, no lack of self-confidence. The lack of self-confidence comes from the wrong identification with the personality. So this is a very important part of the study.
To go back to that lag time that Pablo talked about and the effects on the physical plane. We forget that the physical, and he mentioned it, but I want to be sure to point out that it's the physical plane that's the last to see the effects. So we're waiting, that lag time is from the energies on the inner planes reaching that critical mass until it can show the effects on the physical plane. So we think, I do this action, I pull the reins to the right, I want the horse to move to the right. But the horse isn't going to move to the right until he understands that that means move to the right. So it's going to take some time to be able to do that. Okay, next. We must realize that we are souls and not bodies. If we identify ourselves, as men usually do, with the physical vehicle, we cannot avoid giving altogether undue importance to what happens to it, and we become slaves to it, and it perpetually changing feelings. It is to avoid such bondage that the Oriental yogi substitutes for our ordinary phrases, I am hungry, I am tired, the more exact statement, my body is hungry, my body is tired. We are equally in error when we say, I am angry, I am jealous. The true I is the self behind or within all these vehicles, and that self cannot be angry or jealous, though its astral body may, like the earth.
This is an important teaching in theosophy, and we are going to see more in detail. The idea that the bodies themselves have their own consciousness. This is why the analogy of the horse is good in many ways. Consciousness is using vehicles of consciousness that have their own life and their own consciousness. It's not that we are riding a car that goes wherever we want. We are riding a horse that has its own desires and idiosyncrasies and tendencies and weaknesses and strengths. So our body is not an inert vehicle. It has its own consciousness, its own desires, its own tendencies. So one body is lazy, the other is restless. That has nothing to do with the soul. That has to do with the body itself. When we say, I like Indian food, it's not you. The body, that body in particular, may like hot food. Another body may like, cold weather. Another body may like this kind of comfort. It's the body. The body has an elemental consciousness that has its own desires. The human tragedy is the identification with the elemental consciousness. In the theosophical view, the elemental consciousness is a kind of very basic consciousness that is in the process of evolution, and it's in a process of inhabiting the mineral kingdom, and then the vegetable, and then the animal, and eventually will develop as a human being. So it is a consciousness that is even lower than the mineral kingdom around. When we identify with the elemental consciousness, we are doing what this very basic consciousness wants us to do. It's like, you say you finish lunch and you say, I need to have something sweet after lunch. I want something sweet, and this is your desire. Then you go to the doctor and you see that you have some parasites that produce that effect. You know, the parasites, they trigger the need for something sweet because that's how they feel. So you are living according to what a worm wants. You know, simply that, I'm putting this example to make it more, you know, graphic.
Right, like gremlins, you can think of them as gremlins, and parasites make you queasy.
Yeah, but the idea is that as long as we are identified with all these things and we make decisions based on that identification, we as these beautiful angels that we were talking about yesterday in the lecture, we are slaves to these very basic elemental consciousnesses. So we are going to see that. So Leadbeater says something that is important is to begin to think of ourselves in this way. My body needs this, or my body, you don't need to express, you know, to verbalize it, because most people will think that you are more weird than they already think you are. But the attitude should be that you can recognize, you know, I know that my body needs certain things, and I try not to push my body to do certain things. But when there is that degree of separation, if it is needed, you push the body and you say, I'm sorry, but this is needed right now. And then you try to take care of it. So you see that if you can establish a relationship with a certain space between yourself and the vehicle of consciousness, everything changes. I was at the airport once, and there was a man walking kind of fast because probably they were late for the flight, and there was a kid. So she was walking, and you know there are all these shops, and the kid wanted to stop and buy something, and he wanted, let's buy this, and she said very lovingly but firmly, not now, keep walking. And then another shop, let's not now, keep walking. And that's what we can do with our desires. You know, if there is a desire that is perfectly fine, you may grant it. If they had time, the man may have bought something. But sometimes there are desires that are not appropriate at the moment, and you say, not now, keep walking. You know, you don't repress the desire. You don't feel bad that you desire. You don't say, this is Satan tempting me. You say, not now. This is like, the elemental consciousness are kind of like children in many ways.
Elementals. This personal self is composed of a great many selves or eyes, of which each one has his peculiar claims, and whose demands grow in proportion as we attempt to satisfy them. They are the semi-intellectual forces of the soul that would rend the soul to pieces if they were allowed to grow, and which must be subdued by the power of the real master, the superior I, the spirit. These eyes are the elementals, of which has been said so much in occult literature. They are not imaginary things, but living forces, and they may be perceived by him who has acquired the power to look within his soul. Each of these forces corresponds to some desire. Franz Hartmann.
So the activity, we are going to see that a little more, but the activities of you know, we are not the ones that consciously digest our food. The body does it by itself. We are not the ones that consciously do many things. This is all taken care by the elemental of the physical body. But then that elemental also has its own tendencies and wants its attention and wants, you know, to be comfortable and all the things that we know. The same with the emotions. Emotions, they don't come from the soul. Emotions are, the emotional body is again, a body that is alive, a body that has its own tendencies. How many times have you experienced that you have an emotion that you do not want to have? If that were you, then you should be perfectly able to say, no, I don't want to have this emotion, and the emotion should stop. But there is obviously an independent nature in the emotions Because even though the emotion may be torturing you and you don't want to have that emotion, you cannot stop it. So that is a proof that emotions are something independent from you. The problem is, again, we identify with the emotions, we think we are the emotions, and in that identification is where the power lies. We are going to see that. And same even with thoughts. Do you think that the one that is thinking right now is the soul? If I lose my memory all of a sudden, I couldn't be speaking on this. Memory is related to the activity of the mental elementals. If somebody would change the matter of my mental body, I couldn't be saying all these things. One thing is the soul with its own spiritual level, and another thing are the vehicles of consciousness that the soul uses to express itself. A kid that is born with mental deficiencies, there is nothing wrong with the soul. The problem is that the structure of either the mental body or the physical body is not in the right way, so that the soul can communicate thoughts through him. So it's just in the vehicle of consciousness. So we have to begin to recognize all that. And the better the vehicles of consciousness, the more responsive they can be to the soul. And that's what we as a soul have to do, to bring the vehicles of consciousness to the best possible shape so that they can respond to the soul. But the soul is always different from the vehicles of consciousness. And even if suddenly the vehicles of consciousness stop working, you can see this, with people who have Alzheimer's or things like that. The soul is not really affected. All that was affected is the communication, the mechanism that allows the soul to communicate.
These elementals live in the soul realm of man as long as he lives, and grow strong and fat, for they live on his life principle and are fed by the substance of his thoughts. They are only destroyed by the power of the spiritual will of man, which annihilates them as the light annihilates darkness. Only those who have awakened to spiritual consciousness can have that spiritual will of which the non-regenerated know nothing.
So these elementals, they have a will of their own. There is the possibility of, the astral body. If a clairvoyant sees the astral body, in most people, the astral body is constantly moving, constantly producing colors. This is because the elemental life that is in the astral body is constantly active, producing its own desires and wishes and sadness and this and that. When a clairvoyant sees the astral body of an enlightened being, let's say, the astral body doesn't have any intrinsic motion. It is a calm body of energy that responds to whatever comes from the soul. So these elementals are, or the astral body doesn't need to have these elemental lives. The elemental lives are trying to evolve through our astral body or physical body or mental body, but as consciousness, as the soul gains more and more mastery on the personality, the elemental lives leave the personality, and then you have just the body as a vehicle of consciousness, not as the starter of independent activities. There is a certain level of elemental life that is left there that keeps the body alive, but not with a will of its own. And that is perfectly fine. I mean, the elementals are an evolution that are trying to become denser and denser. They are on the arc of evolution where they have to come from a purely spiritual existence into a more material existence. So the elemental tendencies always go for the grossest, grossest in the sense of gross, dense, heavy. So for example, why is it that all the food that is unhealthy is the food that we like? Why isn't it the healthy food, palatable, and that we desire the healthy food? It's because the elementals, they are semi-intelligent. They don't understand anything about the whole. They understand only the immediate. So this need for the immediate satisfaction comes from the elementals. When we have a reacting to an immediate situation, if we would think about it, we can see that this reaction overall is a wrong action because it will produce difficulties in the present and in the future. But the reaction is not made by the soul, it's made by the elementals. And elementals have no possibility of understanding the whole. They just respond or tend to respond immediately. Somebody is nice to me, there will be an immediate response, even if that person is a person that is, very bad for the environment, and the immediate result will be to try to, support that person. Or if a person is mean to me, even if it is a great person, my emotional reaction will be to be antagonistic, to put extremes, So the elementals have not this overall intelligence, and they will always try to choose the lowest of all the options, because that is their evolution. As Michelle mentioned, if you see the double triangle, the elementals are part of the dark triangle there. They are trying to come down into matter. Those are the sources of tendencies that make us more material, more selfish, more tied to strong emotions, to strong opinions. And the soul is the light triangle that is trying to become more spiritual. So in the friction between these two opposite motions, both elementals and the soul evolve, because we evolve by dealing with opposition. If we want to develop a muscle, you have to put an opposition to the motion, so that by defeating the opposition, you develop the muscle. So same with evolution. Evolution goes by facing opposition and pulling the inner resources to go on. So these elementals will always tend to the lowest possible action, not because they are bad.
The simplest, the easiest. They don't think about, oh, this person is nice to me, but he has an alternative agenda. It just goes to the easiest or the quickest route. It won't take time to evaluate and think. That has to come from a higher faculty. And it comes from a higher faculty once we realize that there is a difference. There is a difference between our real self and the personality and the thoughts and the emotions and the sensations that we feel. And once that happens, we can use our awareness to be aware and just watch. And not try to watch in times of great stress or distress or something like that, but watch in simple times. I noticed when we were driving from Chicago to California, our van was filled with Chicago salt on the outside, so it was filthy. And I just kept thinking the whole way there, our van is so dirty, our van is so dirty, I have to get it washed. And all I could see was clean cars. I swear, every clean car, every car that passed me was clean. And we finally got to Denver about halfway, and I found a car wash, and I washed the van. And it was so shiny and clean, I was so happy. Like, does it matter what my van looks like when I'm driving down the road? But I noticed that those elementals were happy. And since we had time, I said, that's okay, we'll feed you. And then we got on the road, and it was like instantaneous. The first car I saw, I was like, oh my gosh, that car's so dirty. I should just drive right in here and get clean. And then that's all I saw was dirty cars. And I was kind of relaxed because I was just driving, that's all I had to worry about. And so I noticed that shift. I noticed the elementals, I noticed the shift, I noticed what my mind was doing. And I got a chuckle out of it. And Pablo used to say, play with it, enjoy it. And I used to think, what is he talking about? Play? Enjoy? These elementals are driving me crazy. But you get to a point where that awareness comes in, and it is more of a playful time. And then what happens is that once that awareness kicks in and that lag time or that critical mass is felt, then you have that mastery over those elementals and you realize, and you can say, come on honey, not now, instead of, let's go.
Yes, in the second part we will talk a little more about how to, not with that, about how to deal with this. But that is the idea. With awareness, we begin to generate this space between ourselves and the reactions of the elementals.
Thought forms. Every thought of man becomes an active entity by associating itself with an elemental, one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. It survives as an active intelligence for a longer or shorter period, proportionate with the original intensity which generated it. Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. And so man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offsprings of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions, a current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous organization which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. Mahatma K.H.
So we are generating an atmosphere around us with the activity of our consciousness and of all the elementals. Whatever we think, we produce, we beget, we give birth on the inner planes to a little entity. And that entity will become good, beneficent or a maleficent force, symbolically speaking. In all religions, you have this idea of the demon, like the demon and the angel on your shoulders, or the demons tempting you. There's nothing evil in this elemental consciousness. It's just their natural way. They are in a process of, the elementals are happy when they feel, so they will try to stimulate strong emotions, to stimulate strong thoughts or sensations. For them, what we call anger is just energy for them. That energy is negative in our organization because of the kind of actions that pushes us to do. But for the elemental, it's just energy. It's not the elementals are good or bad. But the result of those activities in the human consciousness may be negative or positive. So it is important to realize that we are constantly emanating what we are, as we said, and we are surrounding ourselves with these elementals and energies, and they become the filter through which we perceive the world and also through which we act on the world. You see how we are conditioned by what happened in our childhood. A person that didn't feel safe when a child, now maybe 30, 40, 50 years after the experience, and still that person will tend to see the world as a dangerous place, will interpret people's reaction as with the idea that these people are coming after him or her. And you say, how can something that happened when that person was a child, or in our case, how can that be still alive in the adult that has nothing to do in the situation, in the body, in the development with the child? This is because a certain set of elementals were absorbed, and that we have not worked to shake those elementals out. Because how we perceive things, we perceive them through the elementals. So this work is a work of cleaning our atmosphere, so that we can begin to perceive the world in a more objective way, and we can act in a better way.
And thought forms are very curious. If we had a situation one night that my nephew was having some trouble, and Paulo and I were talking about how to help him. And then we just went to sleep, and my son was in the room sleeping next to us. And
he wasn't there when we were talking about the nephew or anything.
No, and he woke up, and we were talking with my mom about it and my sister, so we were doing a lot of discussing it, and he had never heard us talking about it, and he woke up the next morning and he said, "Mom, I had this weird dream, and it was about Tyler, and he described this whole situation that was exactly the situation we were talking about. What was interesting, though, too, was that it was colored by his world. It had, I think...
His own elements.
Yeah, his own elements. Jake's an athlete, so it was like on an athletic field that the same situation was occurring. So these thought forms are really powerful, or they're out there all the time, and that's good to understand, because a lot of times some of the anxiety or fear we may be feeling are from thought forms that are not even associated with us.
Mm-hmm.
There's a movie, and I forget, Branded? Yeah, and I forget it's a foreign movie, but it's called Branded. And it's about how advertising puts out these thought forms and how we're affected by it. It's really a good movie to watch to get an idea of what thought forms are and how they affect
and
our
how they
life.
feed the elementals. You see that there was
Right.
like this burger place, and they show you like this entity behind the burger place, and a kid was coming, and then that entity started like stimulating this in the
So
kid.
it
and-
started with a little balloon, and then he walked by and you could see the thought form or the elemental got bigger and bigger.
And he wanted to go and eat the burger, and that's how it works. And also this new movie animated Inside Out, that also shows how the process of thinking. You have all these little characters, the sadness character, the joyful character, and they fight each other for who is controlling the body. And that is actually quite true. The problem is that the soul is the one that should be controlling the body, none of these characters.
And since we're talking about movies, this is probably your teenagers watch this, is Hellboy. It was a movie a while ago, but it was a movie that we watched that really showed about these elemental forces in nature. They were nature forces, and the evil guy had used these nature forces and put them out, and then the forces just did what they do. They grow. But as they grew, they took over, and so they were looked at as a maleficent force, but really they were just doing what they do. They just grow. So that was spiritual will. Will is the offspring of the divine, the God in man. Desire, the motive power of the animal life. Most of men live in and by desire, mistaking it for will. But he who would achieve must separate will from desire and make his will the ruler. For desire is unstable and ever-changing, while will is steady and constant. Both will and desire are absolute creators, forming the man himself and his surroundings. But will creates intelligently, desire blindly and unconsciously. His task is twofold: to awaken the will, to strengthen it by use and conquest, to make it absolute ruler within his body, and parallel with this, to purify desire. H.P. Blavatsky.
In the previous quote, Franz Hartmann, who was an early member of the Society and associate of HPB, said that it is the spiritual will that will, he was using he was a German and using a kind of strong language, the spiritual will annihilate the elementals. Now, it is important to understand what the spiritual will is. Today we would put it in a different way, and we would say that when there is an emotional reaction, if you can enter into this state of deep awareness, you open the door for the spiritual will to act, and the very state of awareness will dissolve the reaction. There is a difference between will and desire. Most of us think that will, or what we call will, is just another desire. It's a desire that we agree on, and we call desire to the ones that we don't agree on. So if we are working at fighting one desire with another desire, that generates inner conflict. The spiritual will is not a bullying force. It's not a force that is destructive or that tries to impose itself or tries to repress. The spiritual will is a very powerful but gentle force. As Blavatsky says there, most of us don't know what the spiritual will is. So the first task is to awaken the spiritual will. This spiritual will is not even awakened in most of us. So we need to awaken the spiritual will and give room to this will, for this will to act. And then this will become more and more active. So part of what is needed for this spiritual will to awaken is a purification of desires. As long as desires are dominant, it's very difficult to open the door for this will. You know, if we are in the fit of a reaction, we are going to talk about that in the next session, but trying to watch the reaction without being drawn into it is very difficult. If we are in the fit of a reaction, all that we can do is to struggle against the reaction. If the reaction is not so strong, then we have this space in which we can watch the reaction without being involved. And that watching opens the door for the spiritual will. So for the spiritual will to have room in our nature, we need to start purifying the desires so that they are not so strong, so compelling. And then the spiritual will by itself starts putting order in our psyche. We are going to see that in the next session.
Hence, the vigilant watch of the will we have constantly to exercise to prevent our lower nature from coming up to the surface, which it does in our present undeveloped state. And thus extreme activity and not passivity is the essential condition which with the student has to commence. First, his activity is directed to check the opposing influence of the lower self. And when that is conquered, his untrammeled will, centered in his higher real self, continues to work most efficaciously and actively in unison with the cosmic ideation in the divine mind, HPV.
So she talks about the vigilant watch of the will. Here is where the will is acting in our effort to stay aware, to keep this state of awareness. The more we can keep this state of awareness, the easiest it is for the will to control the lower nature in a natural way. Even the word control is not right. Suppose that you are going to say something that is hurtful. Many times we say something hurtful because we are not aware, we are just taken by the situation, or because we are too identified with our emotions. But if we develop this state of awareness, that state of awareness produces this space that we are talking about, so that the emotion is not so compelling. And there is a certain consciousness there that when the tendency to say something hurtful comes, that very awareness, without any imposing action on our part, that very awareness dissolves it. Because you see that this is hurtful, and then you just let it go. So this is how the spiritual will acts. It acts naturally, spontaneously, when we can position ourselves at the level of the spiritual will, which requires this state of awareness. So Blavatsky says that we need to encourage this vigilant watch by which the will can control the lower nature in this natural and spontaneous way. And then as the lower nature becomes more in tune, that will, that state of awareness retreats and eventually becomes one with the universal mind. What Jesus said, you know, not thy will, not my will, but thine be done. That's where the person becomes an expression of the divine. So this is, of course, a whole process. But we are going to see specifically how to do this in the next session.
Constant attention is required. It would be a superhuman ideal to expect a person never to forget himself for a moment. But disciples are after all trying to become superhuman, because the master is beyond man. If the pupil could live the perfect life, he would himself already be an adept. He cannot be that yet, but if he constantly remembered his ideal, he would approach much nearer to it. Ladira.
So again, the question of the ideal. The ideal is this constant attention. But of course, we are far from that, and we should not take the ideal with ambition and then the frustration that comes with it. So let us try to be as aware as possible during the day, and with the years of practice, that awareness will extend more and more. And at some point, we generate like a background awareness. I think Michelle is going to talk about that sometime. This background awareness that is always available. It's not that you are aware every second of the day, because that is, I don't think it's even possible. And sometimes somebody asks, Krishnamurti would say, be aware from moment to moment. And sometimes people would ask him, how can we be aware 24/7, and he said that would be a dreadful thing to do. That's part of the ambitious mind that wants to be. So he said, just be aware to the moment and be aware the next moment, and don't think in terms of, trying to accomplish something. Just be aware on each moment whenever you can. So we can develop a background awareness that even if we are not particularly aware, that awareness is always available. And when some challenge comes from the outside and our lower nature begins to react, that awareness comes and is present there, so that we don't get, give into the reaction. So this all happens little by little with practice, and it's possible, but it takes years of practice for the most part.
And that background substratum, that is what comes with our sitting meditation. The awareness that we are moment to moment is our meditation during daily life. But our sitting meditation is equally important, and that's where we create this fertile ground from which we can draw when we need to. Control of thoughts. A student of occultism trains himself in the art of thinking, and consequently his thought is much more powerful than that of the untrained man, and is likely to influence a wider circle and to produce a much greater effect. This happens without his making any effort in the matter, but precisely because he has learned the mighty power of thought, it becomes his duty to use it for the helping of others. In order to do this effectively, he must understand exactly how it acts. Leadbeater.
So one of the results of the paying attention to all these teachings is that little by little our thought power becomes more and more powerful. And whether we know it or not, whether we are trying or not, our thoughts, because they become more clear, they become more definite, they become more powerful. So it is part of our responsibility to learn to control the thoughts. This is good that they are powerful, in the sense that the thoughts of, the goodwill of one person may produce the same energy as the ill will of, many thousands of people that have this vague ill will. But at the same time, the bad thoughts of a person that has this power can produce far more, negative results. So not to scare anybody or to put any sense of guilt, but it's just a recognition of a sense of responsibility. And as we go through this study and this work, we should make sure that we are also trying to learn how to control our thoughts, so that we can grow on parallel lines. And as our thought becomes more powerful, also our ability to control them becomes also more powerful. So we grow in a balanced way.
The first step towards control of the mind is to keep it usefully occupied, to have some definite, good, and useful set of thoughts as a background to the mind's operation, something upon which it shall always fall back when there's no immediate need for its activity in connection with duty to be done. Leadbeater.
So here is the first exercise you can do. See in your daily life, what is your mind doing when you don't have anything to do in particular? Where does it go? Does it go to criticize? Does it go to sad memories? Does it go to desires? Where does it go? You will see that your elementals will tend to go in a particular way. And many times, it always ends up exactly in the same place. So many times, most of the negative thoughts that we feel are during these times that we are not occupied. So it is a good practice. First, look at your mind, look at the mind for a month or for a week, whatever you need, and see what your mind does.
You'll see patterns.
You will begin to see the patterns. And then try this that Leadbeater says. Good thing about having theosophical projects like organizing a little talk, a little presentation, is that gives you some material to turn your mind to when you are, not doing anything. Try to keep always a project that is related to somebody else's welfare. Even if you help in church, whatever you do, try to have some project towards which you can turn your mind when you are not, occupied. And that is a very effective way to cut an important source of problems, of difficulties in our lives.
And stay off Facebook.
There are studies that Facebook makes you less happy, because in these kind of things you see posted like a selection of the best moments of 50 people that the mind normally compares to your life, and then people feel that their life is worse than the others, and it's just an illusion. It's all part of the illusion and the illusion of the mind. So if Facebook makes you, sad, then stop going to Facebook and put that time to a better, use, organizing something that will be good for somebody.
And the other thing, little reminders. I have notes all over my house to remind me, be nice to Pablo. Little inspirational talks. I know when I had a desk at work, I had little inspirational things, silence is golden, those type of.
Yeah, so the little reminders is also in my, if you have a smartphone, there are some applications with chimes or things like that you can set to go through the day. So every time you hear the chime, you bring certain thought into your mind, or you bring, be aware, or you try. Now there are many things that can help our practice during the day. So take, I have on Wednesdays mornings, but here unfortunately it's too early in the morning. Wednesday morning in the US, we have a webinar that is called Walking the Theosophical Path, where it's all focused on the practice, and we discuss all these practical things. Well, actually, if you can, it is recorded. So even if you cannot participate live, after every class I send to all the participants a link to the recording and the exercise for the week. So every week I propose some particular exercise, depending on what subject we are talking about. And having a group that is doing some practice is very helpful to support your own practice, because you have this exercise, you can use it as a reminder, you learn from everybody how to keep, this presence of what you should do during the week. So look into that, either participating there or organizing a group in your lodge, or maybe the section, organizing something that people can participate. And
there's many things that even before I found Theosophy, when they used to say every time the phone rings, bring your mind back to the present if you're in an office, or when the doorbell rings, or something that happens every now and then, wherever you are, in the place where you are, use that as that little talisman to bring your mind back to the positive or spiritual or higher thoughts. And once you realize that your mind goes into these patterns, it'll be kind of frustrating, so you'll want something to bring your mind back.
Yeah, so you can generate any kind of little trick that are helpful. As Michelle was saying, say every time you go through a door, that will be a reminder to be aware or to think of something in particular. So if you, at the beginning, of course, you have to struggle a little, but then it becomes a habit. So every time you go through the door, the memory, the remembrance of being present, for example, will come. So there are many strategies that you can use.
And also the will that it takes to remember to do those things will also strengthen the will that you need to overcome these other desires. So that they're all just little exercises, little practices to do to enhance the bigger practices that we do. Control of emotions. It is our business so to order the personality that it shall express the higher ego and nothing else. This means that your astral body, instead of having its own passions and emotions, shall reflect only what the ego chooses. This condition must be attained before one can be presented for the first initiation. The man must have control of his physical, astral, and mental bodies. All of these must be servants of the ego. Leadbeater.
So again, I mentioned briefly the word ego in theosophy is used in a different way from psychology. This was written before modern psychology was born. And the word ego comes, or ego comes from the Greek, and it means I-ness, simply that. So in theosophy, there are three levels of this I-ness. There is the spiritual ego, which is the spiritual sense I am the whole. And that sense of I-ness is based, or it has its seat in what we call buddhi in theosophy, B-U-D-D-H-I, which is the source of spiritual wisdom. So when the sense of I-ness of a person is working at the buddhic level, it is called the spiritual ego. Then there is a pure sense of being that is a manasic sense of being at the level of the higher mind. And then there is the lower ego or the lower ego, that this is more what psychology normally talks about. When psychology says ego, it is the personal ego, the lower ego. But when you see this, the higher ego, you know, some people...
we just made the differentiation between ego and ego. So
some people do in other parts too.
Right.
So when...
But that's what, if we say ego, then that means the higher, and if it's ego, that's the lower. So
just you can play with the pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a question there. Do you want to finish?
I want to go to the last one.
Control of body. There is a semi-conscious entity in each body. This entity is called the body elemental. Evolution for this being consists in learning to respond to coarser and more material vibrations. Hence, it imparts to the body a further tendency toward materiality. This elemental is active in all the subconscious and unconscious operations of the body. Jeffrey Hudson.
So what psychology calls the unconscious, that doesn't really know what that is all these elemental tendencies that come from the physical elemental or the emotional or the mental elementals. So all those tendencies that are pushing us in a certain direction, that they don't really belong to our consciousness, our human consciousness. All these tendencies is what is in psychology is called the unconscious.
Neither the physical body nor the physical elemental submits readily to control. They do not want us either to meditate or to live the spiritual life. They wish to move about, to be fed or to sleep, to be amused and excited, anything in fact, but to feel the life being withdrawn from them into the higher consciousness. If we are to succeed in our quest, however, we must obtain their allegiance and cooperation. We put too much consciousness into it. We think of ourselves as our bodies. Every time we do this, we increase their power of resistance. Every time we think of ourselves as spirit, we withdraw consciousness from them and therefore weaken their power of resistance. Jeffrey Hodson. I think I just thought a good way to realize how these elementals work is to watch a teenager in action. If you watch a male teenager, a boy teenager, you'll see how impulsive his actions are, just like he doesn't have there's no connection between the thought process and the action. And it seems like these elementals are just taking control. If you watch, and I have two boys and a girl, so if you watch a girl teenager, you'll see if she's a talker, she'll everything she feels, everything she thinks, everything she, she senses, she'll say it out loud, and you can see it's just these elementals that are just kind of running what she does, and there's no control, no poise, no getting back to that self. So that was a good way for, actually, when they were teenagers, that's really where I got the idea of these mental and emotional and physical elementals.
An important point here, very important point, is that from a certain point of view, the elementals are kind of a parasite because they feed from us. They have their own energy, but in their process of evolution, if they can attract some of our mental awareness, manasic awareness, that makes them evolve a lot. So what they want is that they want to draw our attention and to produce this identification. And whenever you identify with a particular elemental activity, it's like if you are plugging the computer in the outlet. So the computer has its own battery and an X amount of energy. But the identification is constantly plugging that in, so you are feeding the elemental. When you start trying to lead a spiritual life, what you are doing is retreating your consciousness from the realm of the elemental. And they really react to that, because instinctively, it's not that they have a mind, but it's just, a kind of instinct. Instinctively, they feel the life being drawn from them. And then this is why what we said in meditation, they will try to either distract you, to bring you back to the body, but they can be trained as animals can be trained. But it is the identification, the idea, I am this, that fits the elementals. The main point of our practice is to break that identification. And then little by little, the elementals will lose the energy, and then they will be far more malleable. So yeah, we can stop here. Of course, it's a huge subject, but right. Let's see. Yeah.
We have question over there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. I've never been really comfortable with talk of elemental, so I just wanted to run something by you. It reminds me a little bit, it seems to me that it's possible that the elementals, so-called elementals, are just a sort of a personification of our tendencies. They're the skandhas, really. It's the past that is wanting the sugar after the lunch. It is not actually a separate entity. I mean, I think it can be helpful if it helps people maintain a certain distance. To become aware that that is not me, that is a desire, and I am not a desire, and therefore I don't have to be ruled by desires. But while I don't think this is so in your case at all, I feel uncomfortable because it reminds me, and I think there could be a danger in some people suddenly thinking in terms of entities, that there are these entities in them telling them that they want to do things. It's quite similar if you think about it that way. Anyway, I suppose I just would like to know what you think of the possibility that the elementals are a personification of the skandhas or the tendencies from the past.
Yeah. Every idea has its danger, every idea, and a danger of this idea of the elementals, maybe what you say. Normally, if you take how these authors describe this, there are three levels to a reaction. There is the skandha, there is the elemental, and there is the thought form. This is how they tend to describe it. So the skandha is like the door, or is that vibration in consciousness that attracts this elemental consciousness. The elemental consciousness, so the skandha would be the seed. the elemental consciousness is like the soul, and the thought forms and emotion forms that are produced is like the body. So these are three levels of the same. Now, if you focus more on the skandha, then you can prevent yourself from thinking about entities. If you focus more on the elementals, then you have this idea of entities. Now the question is that everything in the universe is an entity. You know, as we know, everything in the universe is alive and is some kind of entity. When one time Leadbeater described, whether you believe this or not, but it sounds really weird, but he described there was a rock that was really kind of like in love with one of the group of people that he was training. He said, we used to go to sit on a mountain, and there was a rock that was really attractive to one person, and if you could see like the astral, not really body, but counterpart of the rock, when this person was close, there was like an effort from the astral matter of the rock to come closer to the person. So from a certain point of view, everything is kind of entity in the universe. Our problem is that it's so difficult to think of an entity, but not this kind of human entity, like this little demon, you know, so it is a difficult concept to get the right balance between, there is some intelligence, and if you see both the masters and Blavatsky, they say it's a semi-intelligence. There is some intelligence there is some degree of entity, but at the same time it's not an entity as we normally think. We anthropomorphize all entities. We think this is a little person here, you know, pulling us. So what I would say, you know, we need to work it out in a way that can be useful for us. There is a danger in thinking of entities and then, you know, like the devil made me to think and do this and all that. And if you think it's healthier to place more emphasis on the skandha part, that is perfectly fine, because that is also true. I personally like to make emphasis on the elemental aspect simply because it's more graphical, it's more obvious for people to produce this separation. Once you produce that, you know, you can always drop any theory. The theories are to help you get the right attitude. Once you get the right attitude, you can drop any theory, because any theory is an attempt to explain a truth that is always beyond words. So I would be comfortable with talking about this more from the point of view of the skandhas. But in that case, you still think that the skandha is part of you, you know, so it's more difficult with the point of view from the skandha to make more graphic the separation between the feeling and the consciousness. But it's good to keep in mind all the different aspects, and serious theosophical study, especially in groups where you have time, should always involve looking at the same thing from different points of view, so that they balance each other.
That's what I was going to say. That's a really good point to bring up, your point of view of it, because I know in the beginning, I need concrete, in my beginning studies, I need concrete examples. My mind cannot go into these abstract things and then figure out how to work with it. So it's like a process, like Pablo said. We start with the concrete. We understand that it's just an example, it's just an idea, it's not the real thing or what it really is, and then we can move to more abstract ideas, or more ideas of these are not real things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say they are real, but not quite in the way that we interpret it at the level of concepts.
Right, not personified, not personified. Because we do that with God. We can all get past, most of us can get past the idea that God is not a person. We can depersonify it. But in the beginning, or when we first started studying, it helps us to bring that abstract concept into conception.
Okay, yeah, we one more because we are past our time.
I'll try to be quick.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pedro. I do like the way your mind works, and thank you for the diagnosis. I want to offer something that Blavatsky has many times offered to us, and that I'll quote from The Secret Doctrine, which I have the abridged version on page 146. Yes, your destiny is written in the stars. And also from The Secret Doctrine, the Adyar edition, 1938, page 386. The descent and reascent of the monad or soul cannot be disconnected from the zodiac. I would offer that all of this from the zodiac. I offer that this whole subject is dealt with there. Most people don't want to study it because it is so mental, emotional, and so on, but it's a deep study and so exciting. Thank you so much. I'd like to diagnose it.
Thank you and everybody.